Welcome back, everyone. It's great to have you here for another deep dive. This time we're taking a close look at kind of a huge shift that's happening in retail right now. And it's something that I think has been building for quite a while, but it's really coming to a head this year and next year.
Yeah.
And that's the wave of Macy's store closures that are being announced.
Yeah.
And will continue to happen over the next couple of years.
Right.
So we've pulled together a whole bunch of sources on this. We've got news reports, we've got industry analysis, we've got some actual statements and announcements from Macy's itself.
Great.
To really try to understand what's going on here. You know, why are they making this move? What's the bigger plan? What does this mean for the future of shopping for the communities that are affected? And so let's just kind of dive right in.
Yeah.
And it seems like, you know, the centerpiece of all of this is this strategy that they're calling the Bold New Chapter, which they announced last February, but it's really kind of starting to take shape now in 2025. What's the sort of the core idea behind the Bold New Chapter?
Well, I think at its heart, the Bold New Chapter is really Macy's attempt to try to secure sustainable and, importantly, profitable sales growth.
Okay.
It's a recognition that the retail landscape has changed so much that their business model really needs to evolve. And these store closures that we're seeing are definitely, a big part of that evolution. But it's a much broader plan than just, shrinking the number of stores.
Oh, so it's not just about sort of like damage control and kind of pulling back.
I don't think so.
It's more than that. What are the sort of the main pieces of the Bold New Chapter besides the store closures?
Well, so, as you mentioned, the store closures are significant. I mean, they've announced an initial wave of 66 Macy's stores closing just this year in 2025. But they're aiming to close approximately 150 underperforming Macy's locations by the end of 2026.
Wow.
So that's a pretty substantial, reshaping of their physical presence.
Yeah, definitely a big change. And so what about the stores that are remaining open? What's happening there?
So part of the strategy is to really concentrate resources and investments in about 350.
Yeah.
What they're calling, quote, go forward Macy's locations. So the idea there seems to be to really focus on the stores that they believe have the strongest potential for long-term success. That likely means things like upgrades to the store environment, enhanced customer service initiatives.
Okay.
Maybe a more curated selection of merchandise in those locations.
So it's kind of a quality over quantity thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Now, one thing I noticed that seems to be kind of a big piece of this as well is a real emphasis on their luxury brands, like Bloomingdale's and Bluemercury.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a really interesting piece of the Bold New Chapter puzzle. And it seems clear that Macy's is looking to really capitalize on the luxury retail sector, through Bloomingdale's and Bluemercury specifically. And so their plan right now is to open approximately 15 new Bloomingdale's stores and 30 new Bluemercury stores.
Wow.
Over the next 3 years.
So a big expansion there.
Yeah. Plus, they're planning to remodel about 30 existing Bluemercury locations. So it definitely seems like a strategic bet on a different segment of the market.
Yeah, kind of hedging their bets a little bit, shrinking the core Macy's brand, but then expanding in the higher end market.
Exactly.
And then the last piece of this that I noticed seems to be freeing up some capital through asset sales.
That's right. And so to really, fund these investments and bolster their financial footing, Macy's has set a goal of generating somewhere between $600 and $750 million by 2026 through what they call asset monetization. So, that could involve selling off real estate holdings that they have, or other assets that are maybe no longer central to their core business.
Okay, so that gives us kind of a good overview of the Bold New Chapter, I think. But let's really dig into like why they're closing so many Macy's stores.
Yeah.
The term underperformance keeps coming up, but what are the sort of the underlying factors that are driving that?
So I think the underperformance is really fundamentally linked to how people are choosing to shop, the ways that that's evolved.
Yeah.
And the biggest driver really is just this continued and accelerating shift towards online purchasing.
Yeah.
And this isn't a new trend. We all know that online shopping has been growing for a long time. But the pandemic really amplified it, and it's kind of become ingrained in a lot of consumers' habits now, especially for, kind of everyday goods and things like that.
It's just hard to argue with the convenience of it.
Absolutely. And so that has really had a direct impact on physical retail, and particularly, kind of traditional department stores like Macy's that are often located in shopping malls.
Okay.
Foot traffic to these malls has just declined as more consumers opt for the ease and the accessibility of shopping online.
Yeah, and Macy's CEO Tony Spring has kind of spoken about this directly.
Yeah, he has, and he's been quoted as saying, emphasizing that this is a strategic decision to close these underperforming stores so they can concentrate their resources on locations where they're seeing a positive response from customers to their merchandise, to the overall shopping experience. So it's really about kind of maximizing their impact where they're already resonating with shoppers.
Now, what's particularly interesting to me is that even some of their smaller format stores, like the Market by Macy's, are being closed.
That's right.
And so that kind of suggests that even that adaptation, even that move towards a more nimble format, hasn't been a guaranteed success. What does that tell us?
Well, that's a really good point. And I think, the fact that some of these newer, smaller format stores are also on the closure list really highlights the fact that, even really established retailers face huge challenges when they try to adapt and innovate with new formats. It suggests that just shrinking the footprint isn't a magic bullet.
Yeah.
You really have to understand, the specific needs and preferences of consumers in those different formats.
Yeah.
And I think it also shows a willingness on Macy's part to, reevaluate and pivot even on relatively recent strategies.
Okay, so let's talk about, the kind of the practical side of this, like the timeline and the geography of these closures.
Yeah.
We know the target is around 150 by the end of 2026, but these initial 66 that are happening this year, it's a pretty big number to wrap our heads around right now.
It is, and the fact that a lot of those 66 closures are expected in the first half of 2025, possibly even the first quarter, it really underscores how urgently Macy's is moving to implement this strategy.
Yeah, so for those of you listening out there who are maybe wondering, is the Macy's near me on the chopping block? It sounds like the wheels are already in motion.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, clearance sales at those 66 locations began back in January 2025, and they're expected to last, 8 to 12 weeks. And just a note, if you're interested in furniture, clearance sales at the furniture galleries in those closing stores will likely begin in February or March.
Okay, so this isn't just a localized issue. This is impacting communities all over the country.
That's right. These initial 66 store closures will affect 22 states nationwide. Yeah. And so while the impact is going to be, kind of felt broadly, some states are going to see a higher concentration of closures in this first phase.
Yeah. Can you give us a sense of, which states are being kind of hit the hardest in this initial wave?
So looking at the numbers, New York and California are actually tied for the highest number of closures in this first round.
Okay.
9 stores closing in each state. Florida follows close behind with 7 closures. And then Texas is going to see 6 closures.
That's pretty significant. And that concentration in some of the, most populous and economically diverse states is pretty striking.
It is, yeah.
I mean, that suggests that this isn't just, about sort of regional economic downturns or anything like that.
I don't think so. I think, the fact that states like New York and California, Florida, and Texas are seeing a lot of these closures really indicates that, these underperformance issues are being driven by those broader kind of, shifts in consumer behavior that we talked about, that are really impacting, various markets across the country. And it's also worth noting that, Macy's has actually provided a detailed list of all 66 locations that are slated for closure. So, they're being pretty transparent about,
So people can check it out.
Yeah, for the affected communities and certainly for employees.
Okay. Yeah. And that brings us to the people who work at these stores. The closure of 150 locations is inevitably going to lead to a lot of job losses.
It is. It's an unfortunate but kind of unavoidable consequence of closures of this scale.
Yeah. And do we have a sense of, the total number of job losses across, all 150 stores?
So we don't have an exact number yet for all 150 stores, but we do have, some specific examples that kind of illustrate the impact.
Okay.
For instance, the closures that have been announced in Sterling Heights and Troy, Michigan are expected to result in a combined loss of over 200 jobs.
117 in Sterling Heights and 92 in Troy. So those are real numbers, with real consequences for individuals and families. Absolutely. And there are regulations in place to kind of try to help ease that transition a little bit for the affected workers, right?
Yeah, definitely. So, these kinds of large-scale layoffs typically fall under what's called the WARN Act.
Okay.
The Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. And essentially what that does is it mandates that companies provide advance notice to employees in the event of mass layoffs.
Okay.
So, that's intended to, give individuals some time to prepare and start looking for new employment.
And what about Macy's themselves? Are they offering any kind of support to their departing employees?
So Macy's has said publicly that they do intend to provide severance benefits to eligible employees who are affected by the store closures. And they've also said that they will, explore opportunities to place affected employees in open positions at other Macy's locations where that's feasible. And some of the reporting has suggested that store management is going to be actively involved in trying to find, alternative roles for good performing employees.
Okay.
Within the same geographic area.
But even with those efforts, just the sheer scale of these closures suggests that a lot of people are still going to end up facing job displacement.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's true.
It's a tough situation.
It is. And I think while Macy's efforts to mitigate the impact are certainly important, a considerable number of individuals are still likely to experience job loss, and that's going to have a real effect on their lives and on the economies of their local communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And beyond just the impact on employees.
Yeah.
These closures can have much broader kind of community and economic ramifications.
Yeah.
What should we be sort of aware of there?
So in some areas, particularly areas that have limited existing retail options, the closure of a major store like a Macy's can contribute to what's sometimes called a shopping desert.
Okay.
And essentially that means that residents in those areas, kind of lose access to a range of goods and services. And that can really impact the overall quality of life in those communities.
Yeah, and then for the shopping malls themselves, where a lot of these Macy's are located,
right?
This could be a real turning point.
It could. Macy's often serves as what they call an anchor tenant in a shopping mall. They draw in a huge amount of foot traffic. And when an anchor store like that leaves, it can actually trigger what are called co-tenancy clauses in the leases of other smaller retailers in that mall.
Oh, wow.
And those clauses can allow those other stores to, break their leases or renegotiate their terms.
All right, so it's like a domino effect?
Yeah, exactly. And that can lead to, even more vacancies and kind of an overall decline in that mall's, economic viability.
So one closure could really set off, this whole chain reaction within a shopping center.
It really could. And, I think that's going to force mall owners to really get creative about, how they repurpose these large vacant spaces.
Yeah.
We might see, an increase in alternative uses for former department stores, things like, medical facilities or entertainment complexes, fitness centers, maybe even residential conversions. So the landscape of the American shopping mall could look very different in the coming years.
Now, on the other hand, could these closures also unlock some new opportunities for certain locations?
Yeah, in some cases they absolutely could. In some prime real estate markets, the closure of a Macy's could present a really valuable redevelopment opportunity.
Okay.
Those locations are often really well situated in terms of infrastructure and accessibility, and they could attract new and more diverse types of development, potentially leading to mixed use projects that could actually revitalize that area. So it really depends, on the specific location and kind of the prevailing market demand in that area.
Now, one other thing that I came across that was kind of interesting was the potential financial implications for commercial real estate financing.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So those closures can have, repercussions in the world of commercial real estate financing. And specifically, commercial mortgage-backed securities, what are called CMBS loans, that include, these closing Macy's stores as collateral. Those loans are starting to show increased rates of delinquency. And they're appearing more frequently on watch list reports, compared to, CMBS loans that are backed by Macy's stores that are remaining open. So that suggests, kind of a higher level of perceived financial risk associated with, properties that are anchored by these closing stores.
So it sounds like, the success of these transitions for the vacated spaces is really going to be influenced by a lot of factors.
It is, yeah.
It's not a simple equation.
It's a very complex situation. It's going to depend on the specifics of the location, the overall, health of the local and regional economy, and the proactiveness of mall owners and local authorities in, envisioning and implementing new uses for these spaces.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in some cases, Macy's departure could actually accelerate the decline of malls that were already struggling.
Right. So it's not always going to be a positive outcome.
Not necessarily.
Okay, so it sounds like, Macy's isn't just, relying on these store closures to kind of, weather this evolving retail environment. Yeah. What are some of the other strategic adjustments that they're making?
Yeah, I mean, beyond, just reducing the number of physical stores, they're making significant investments in their e-commerce platform.
Okay.
And in their overall, digital capabilities. I think they really understand that a substantial portion of their customer base is going to continue to shop online. And they need to provide, a seamless and engaging and user-friendly experience online.
Right. And we also touched on those smaller store formats earlier. Yeah. But it seems like they're also exploring other types of physical presences as well.
Yeah, they are. So while the Market by Macy's format is being kind of reevaluated, they're still exploring and investing in other smaller store concepts. And they're also looking at establishing a presence in, things like outdoor shopping centers and lifestyle centers. The idea there being to reach customers in more convenient locations, potentially higher traffic locations outside of that kind of traditional, enclosed mall.
Yeah. And then what about, the Macy's stores that are actually going to remain open?
Yeah.
What's the strategy for those?
Well, a core part of the bold new chapter is to really enhance the operations and the overall customer experience in those roughly 350 go-forward locations.
Okay.
And they've reported some really positive results from what they call their First 50 pilot program.
Okay.
Where they basically made significant investments in a select group of stores. And it led to increased sales and improved customer satisfaction.
Okay.
And so the plan is to roll out, those successful initiatives to a larger number of their remaining stores.
It's a kind of a dual strategy, like streamline the physical footprint, but then reinvest in the stores that they think, have a strong future.
Exactly.
And underpinning all of this is this focus on creating, this kind of seamless omnichannel shopping journey.
Right. They really want to integrate their physical stores and their online platforms so that customers have a consistent and convenient experience, regardless of how they choose to interact with the brand.
Okay.
And that includes things like, leveraging data to personalize the shopping experience, tailored recommendations and promotions.
It's really fascinating to see all these different, kind of facets of their strategy coming together.
Yeah.
So what are the experts in the retail world saying about, this overall approach?
So, retail analysts have offered a variety of perspectives.
Okay.
But a lot of them see these store closures as a necessary and pragmatic step for Macy's to really optimize their brick-and-mortar presence in a really challenging retail landscape. And the general consensus seems to be that, shedding these underperforming locations, especially those that are in malls with limited growth potential, is a sound business decision, albeit a difficult one for the communities and employees involved.
Yeah. So kind of a painful but necessary move for long-term viability.
That seems to be the prevailing sentiment among a lot of analysts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the emphasis on higher performing locations and the continued investment in digital channels are generally viewed as sensible moves to try to improve the company's overall financial health. Right. Are there any sort of key concerns that analysts are raising?
Well, so some analysts have expressed some concern about, Macy's revised financial guidance for 2025. Which, anticipates a decline in same-store sales, even with, the planned renovations and merchandising changes. So that suggests that, a turnaround might not be immediate or even guaranteed. And there's also been, some surprise expressed by some analysts regarding the closure of some of the newer, smaller format stores, which kind of suggests that particular adaptation, may still need some refinement to really achieve profitability.
Yeah. And what about the impact on the shopping malls themselves?
Yeah.
That seems to be a big, kind of point of discussion.
It is. Yeah. I mean, the departure of a major anchor tenant like Macy's creates both, significant risks and potential opportunities for mall owners, can trigger those co-tenancy clauses that we talked about, which really forces mall owners to, aggressively rethink their properties, to attract new tenants and cater to these evolving consumer preferences. But, ultimately, while analysts largely understand, the strategic logic behind Macy's bold new chapter, there are, varying degrees of optimism about the company's ability to really achieve, sustained growth and successfully navigate, all the complexities of the current retail environment.
Yeah, it's a really complicated picture.
It is.
Now, this isn't the first time that Macy's has undertaken a significant round of store closures.
No, it's not.
This feels like part of a longer-term trend.
It does.
That we've seen in the department store sector.
Absolutely. The current bold new chapter is really part of this longer term pattern of store rationalization.
Okay.
Not just for Macy's, but across the entire department store industry. And in fact, over the past decade, Macy's has actually closed more than a third of its store fleet.
Right.
Between 2015 and 2023, they shuttered approximately 300 locations.
So that really puts this current announcement in perspective.
It does.
It's not just this one-off thing. It's part of this ongoing process.
It is. It really highlights, I think, the ongoing and persistent challenges that traditional department stores have faced in adapting to the rise of e-commerce and the changing preferences of their customers. And the current strategy with its, kind of accelerated pace of closures in these initial years does appear to be a more decisive and maybe a more comprehensive approach compared to some of the previous initiatives.
Yeah, you mentioned the community impact earlier, and I remember reading about the closure of the downtown Brooklyn store.
Yeah.
Which is a location that has a really long and significant history.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the closure of that store, which served as a department store in that location for over 160 years,
wow.
With Macy's occupying the space for a significant portion of that time, really underscores, I think, the emotional and community impact.
Yeah.
That these decisions have, it's more than just a store closing. It represents, the loss of a local landmark and a piece of shared history for a lot of residents.
And it sounds like the underlying reasons, that Macy's has given for these closures have remained pretty consistent over time.
They have. The recurring rationale has generally centered on underperformance and the strategic need to concentrate resources on, more profitable locations and those rapidly growing, digital channels. However, as we've talked about, the current strategy does appear to be more holistic. It encompasses not just closures, but also significant investments in the remaining, brick-and-mortar locations and the expansion of their luxury banners, which kind of indicates, a more multifaceted approach to adaptation.
So to kind of pull it all together for you or our listener, it seems pretty clear that these Macy's store closures represent a really significant kind of strategic pivot.
You do, yeah.
That's driven by this, really complex interplay of factors. This ongoing shift in consumer behavior towards online shopping, the increasing dominance of e-commerce, and then just this fundamental kind of reassessment of their physical store footprint.
That's right, yeah.
And as we've explored, these closures have undeniable human and community consequences. But they also present potential opportunities, both for Macy's to kind of reshape its business for the future.
Yeah.
And for the commercial real estate landscape to undergo a pretty significant evolution.
Yeah.
And on that note, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider. Given this historical context of repeated store closures within Macy's and the broader department store sector, and then coupled with, the kind of multi-pronged approach of this bold new chapter. What do these closures ultimately signal about the long-term future of large department stores in America? Is this a necessary contraction that could actually pave the way for a potential resurgence, in a different form? Or is it a sign of a more, fundamental and irreversible reshaping of the retail landscape as we know it? We encourage you to think about, the implications for your own communities, your own shopping habits, and the future of, how and where we buy the things we need and want. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.